David Zilber is a chef. He's a butcher. He's the former head of the fermentation lab at Noma, but moreover, he actually can do way more than that because he's also a photographer, occasionally modeling. And what I really appreciate is that he makes his love for science very accessible to a lot of people over his social media channels and over his communication channels. So he has a lot of facets, I would say, in his character and in his work. And I would say in the last years, he has become, sorry, David, that I'm talking about you in like the third person. You have become, I think, a very important and interesting voice in the world of food worldwide and globally. Okay, David, thanks for being here. Thanks for taking the time and sharing with our community and with us in Berlin. Although there's like a lot of people that are from all over the world, so it's not just the Berlin community. But thanks for talking to us tonight. And when I first approached you, I actually thought that I will be sitting today with you in a barn and we will ferment some stuff. And since then, a lot has changed, actually. Yeah, the pandemic has hit, but also for you privately, a lot of things and professionally have changed. So for me, I think it's when I saw that you're changing your professional path, I thought that is actually a really interesting thing to talk about, because we talk a lot about the future of hospitality, but also a lot about what the role for young people can be in that food system. And you are a role model for a lot of young people. So I'm super excited to talk to you about this today. And the first thing that I want to speak with you about is like, how did you actually start to work in the food and hospitality industry in the first place? How did you, like a lot of chefs have these like romantic stories about how their grandma made pasta with them. Like, what is your story? How did you end up here?
Yeah, I guess I was bad at everything else, so that made it easy to be good at cooking, I think. No, but I was, I mean, I grew up in Toronto, Canada, in a mixed family. My father was like an Ashkenazi Jew, born in Montreal right after the war. My mom immigrated to Canada from Dominica, a little tiny island in the Caribbean. And they met and fell in love in their 20s in Montreal, and then moved to Toronto and had 2 kids. I grew up in a high-density neighborhood, a very standard North American, 80s, 90s upbringing, lots of packaged foods. My mom was a great cook, my dad less so. And I was always like in the kitchen helping out, and, generally we ate pretty okay food, but it wasn't like a gastronomic temple, my house, or anything. It was just a little 2-bedroom apartment in a high rise. Very middle class. And, my mom had these kind of secret weapon recipes that she grew up eating and cooking from Dominica. So like, rice and peas and palau and like sorrel punch and like codfish and bakes.
What is sorrel punch?
Sorrel punch is, sorrel, the sour plant.
Okay.
And then like kind of cooked down into a soup, like boiled hot and then served chilled. And these are just things that were like around my household growing up. It was definitely part of my, upbringing. Meanwhile, on my father's side, we had a very Jewish influence. So, my grandma, even though she never lived in the same city as us, we would go for high holidays. It was just Rosh Hashanah. We'd always have like matzo ball soup or gefilte fish, all of these Eastern European, classic Jewish foods. But that being said, I mean, my parents were also super strapped for time. Like I grew up eating lots of stuff out of boxes or fast food or takeout or whatever. So I definitely I wouldn't say that I had like any sort of romantic story about, plucking watermelons out of fields or working on a farm or running after chickens as a kid. It was very much the opposite. And in school, I was like extremely apathetic as a student, really didn't pay attention, didn't hand in my assignments on time. I think I really frustrated my teachers a lot. So, as I made my way through high school, growing up in my teens, as all my friends were getting scholarships to universities, and I was like, oh, cool, I'm going to go for a business degree, or I'm going to go to film studies or whatever. I was, up shit creek without a paddle, and there was no university that would accept me with my grades. So I had to do something else. And I talked with my guidance counselor, and luckily for me, I had a guidance counselor that actually cared. And she noticed that I had this kind of interest in cooking. It was something I kind of got into in my late teens, but I started like just watching the Food Network out of boredom, and then baking cakes for my friends' birthdays. And it wasn't like a passion or anything, but it was just something that I did. And then she kind of dug into that, and she's like, well, I know I've seen you in home form, like bringing birthday cakes to school for people. Would you be interested in cooking? And I hadn't really considered it, but I was like, what, at this point, sure, I'll try anything. So
were there other options?
I was considering going to like college for like early childhood education. I was good with kids. I used to volunteer at like children's hospitals and things like that. But I really didn't feel all that passionate about that. So I was kind of in like, my first quarter of my life crisis, and couldn't figure out what I was trying to do.
How old were you then? What was
This must have been 17 okay. years old. But I took her advice, and she enrolled me into a co-op placement program where for my last year of high school, I got a college culinary crash course. So like 3 weeks of just like, you go to an actual cooking school, like one of the community colleges in Toronto, and just learn how to hold a knife, learn how to use a tilt skillet, learn how to blanch a vegetable, learn how to make a risotto, like the most basic stuff. And no one had any clue what they were doing. Luckily, my teacher liked me well enough. And then after the crash course was finished, she gave me one of her best placements. She thought I was bright, or at least like entertaining in the classroom. So she had a pocket of chefs around the city that were willing to take these interns. And I landed at a restaurant called Rain, which was Asian fusion, Pan-Asian. The head chef used to work for Nobu. The food was very tall. Everything was done like 3 ways, like early 2000s. Like it was amazing. And as soon as I stepped foot in the kitchen, even though I was so green and like didn't even understand how to hold a mop properly, didn't understand like what the schedule of service was like, or when things happened in a day, like something immediately clicked, because there was a very tangible goal to be finished in a set amount of time. It wasn't a project. It wasn't read this. It wasn't anything boring. It was like, it was fast paced. It was hands on. I had to do it. Someone was on my case about it. And all of a sudden I got into a rhythm that made sense to me, and then I thrived. And I finished my placement. I fit in great in the team, and they just asked if I wanted to start working there. So after I graduated high school using this co-op placement to get my last credits, I dropped out of the rest of the program, which would have gotten me some form of degree, and just started working at Rain for all of, now this was 2004, mind you, and I think I was making $1,120 a month, which in euro would be like the equivalent of like maybe, and this is Canadian, not American, so that's maybe like 600 euro a month. And I
can you live in Toronto? Like you live with your parents still, or I'm not sure if that's a too private question.
No, it's fine. I mean, I was like an 18-year-old kid by this point, but no, I was I had moved downtown, and I was renting like the spare room of like one of my friend's mom. It was, like really like down and out in London and Paris vibes. Yeah. Like not having enough money at the end of the month to like buy toothpaste or get myself dinner or something. But when you're 18, you do it. And that's how I got my foot in the door in food. And I worked for them for 2 years, and then I realized that I like was getting better at it. Like I could see myself improving. I could see myself learning. Like I will never forget the day that I worked the grill for the first time and cooked a medium rare veal chop. Like And I put it up for my chef, and he's like, "Wow, spot on." And you're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, wow, like I get this now."
I think that's a really big part of why being a chef and why working like in a craft is so rewarding, right? Because like you get immediate feedback and you get immediate results, and
Yeah.
you see what you've done at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Which is
It's not abstract. It's not pushing paper. It's not emails. It's not wheeling dealing. It's there and then, and like you said, immediate. And from that point on, I just kept looking for better and better restaurants to work at. Went to Vancouver, worked for this guy named David Hawksworth, who used to work for like Marco Pierre White. Went back to Toronto, worked for a guy who used to work for Al Booley. Staged a little bit in the States for Paulie Brandt in New York. And did the whole circuit. Yeah, I took 2 years to see another side of food and worked as a butcher and like charcutier in an organic butcher shop. And that was up until I was like 28. And then I was working as a sous chef of Canada's Best Restaurant. I was like, all right, this is a ceiling. Like it's either I open my own place or I keep learning, and I didn't feel ready. So I wrote to Noma this cover letter that got circulated around a bunch, and they took me on back in 2014. Yeah.
How did you get though? I mean, like applying all over the world in restaurants. I think that's like what chefs do when they feel like, okay, there's a ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
But you ended up doing a really pretty exotic, I think someone in some magazine described it as exotic once, an exotic job in the restaurant industry, which is not being in the kitchen and like working evening service, but being in the fermentation lab. Like what led to that, and what skills did you have when you started that job?
Well, yeah. So even though I was an apathetic student all through school, I always loved science, but I always felt that I wasn't applied enough, or somehow I thought I wasn't smart enough, either whether that's being applied or getting the grades or whatever, um, to make it in the sciences, to like go to university and get like a master's degree or something. But I always loved and adored the sciences. Was a huge nerd, like really liked Star Wars and Star Trek and things like that. And in my early 20s, I started reading science nonfiction. Like there was a book that was posted on a blog um, of this guy that I thought had great style and was like into like cool art and design and stuff. And I was like, oh, you know what? Like I like this guy's recommendations. I'll pick this up. And that was one book that's just started it all for me. And so that was maybe back in like 2008 that I read a book about language, and then I read another book about language, and then I read a book about gravity, and then I read a book about genetics, and then I read a book about anthropology, and then it just never stopped. And then, like 15 years and 350 books later, I have this very solid base of just self-education because I just kept getting thirstier and thirstier for explanations. So when I was at Noma, I think Renee and a lot of the guys on the team were like, okay, Dave knows more than your like average cook. Like I could explain things about how food worked that maybe a lot of other people didn't think about. And that was really all I had on anyone. I mean, I fermented a fair bit at the butcher shop, making sausages and things like that, but I didn't go in there thinking that fermentation was my specialty. I remember taking tours around and being like, koji's a bacteria, and then being corrected by some of the guys in the lab being like, it's fungus, they're different. I'm like, oh, sorry. So it was really an opportunity that I thought I couldn't turn down when they asked me if I wanted to go in as like a production sous chef just to help lighten the load for Lars and Ariel, who were working there at the time. And then again, it was kind of like going through the motions of me starting cooking as soon as I got into the lab. Now, in a different way, things clicked again. And I started making connections between all the readings that I had, which never really had much payoff in the world of food, like understanding how evolutionary biology works doesn't really have that much day-to-day real world payout if you're, a fish cook in a 40-seat bistro. But all of a sudden, I was in a position where those sorts of knowledge bases did have real world consequences. And me understanding, you know, like the mating types of a fungus, or the genetic lineage of like eukaryotic cells or whatever it is, helped me understand my job a lot better, and it helped me innovate faster and communicate better and be able to do my job better. So that was the payoff that I guess Renee and Dan Giusti gambled on when they put me in the lab, that I guess paid off for them. Yeah.
Right. Looking at the industry now, you said you started, what was it, 2004?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Looking at that time now and looking at the development in the industry now, no, let me start differently. Sorry.
Sure.
This year, you now decided to change your career and not be at the fermentation lab anymore. What was the point where you decided to make that decision, and what made you rethink, okay, something needs to change for myself, and why?
Well, I mean, what was the trigger? I guess the pandemic was the trigger.
Okay.
You know, it was such an abrupt closure of the restaurant back in March. I think March 14th was our last day of service before things shut down at Noma. And, you know, we were seeing the books get all messed up because flights from China were first canceled, and then people within Europe started traveling. And, you know, like 85% of Noma's guests are tourists who fly in from abroad to eat at the world's best restaurant. And it came very quickly. And then, you know, that Saturday service, we were like half full. That has never happened. And then the government mandate came in, and we were shut for. We didn't go to work for maybe like 2 months until like, so we had all of April, maybe until like early May, maybe like 6 or 7 weeks. Anyway, in that time, I had a lot of time to reflect. I didn't really think of it much, but then it was when we got back to work and we are trying to figure out solutions, and we are doing the burger bar. And it was kind of as the burger bar was getting started up, you know, I was like, wait, does this make sense anymore? Like, what are we working to? We were working to survive. Like, Noma still needed to make an income. We still needed to all have paychecks. And that was all well and good. But there was so much that we did. There were so many, there was so much of Noma, of fine dining, is performative. It's performance. It's like theater, basically. And the pandemic stripped away the audience. So it feels very strange. It felt very strange to me to be sitting on one of the world's grandest stages and then like singing to the masses when there's no one there. It's like a dress rehearsal that is still in the motion of being the most serious, high-level thing you've ever done, but you're not singing to anyone. You're not plating food for the voters that are going to decide whether Noma's the world's best restaurant or not, you know, next year. The 50 Best Awards get canceled. All of the steps that I took to ascend to this level in gastronomy, all of the hard work that I put in, all of a sudden, like, were rendered meaningless by this virus. The whole system just collapsed. And of course, cooking is more than that. You know, cooking is about making good food. It's about nourishing people. It's about hospitality. And that's maybe the point that I kind of like realize and clued into. It's like, oh wait, cooking is more than just Noma. And I'd put in my time. You know, 6 years is a long time to work to that level. And there's something, as we were kind of getting back into it, cooking burgers that were delicious burgers that were great, that made so many people happy, you know, made me realize it's like, wait, maybe this is the thing I'm meant to do. Is like, maybe I'm meant to make burgers. Maybe there's other problems to solve in the food system that will reach more people than a 45-seat dining room ever could. And then, I spoke to Renee and put in my notice and finished at the beginning of June.
And yeah, now looking back at the starting point when you started in the industry, what do you see has changed, and what do you think are the most important issues that we as professionals in the industry are facing, be it pandemic or also things that maybe already were there before but not that visible or not that urgent?
When I started cooking, I mean, the most important things in our industry were, what cool technique can you do that the restaurant next door can't? It was like, who staged al bulli and got to see, Albert Adria's Taller and came back with like the secret technique that's going to get them to the top of the city's best restaurant list. Like, that's what mattered in a strange way. This was before Instagram. This was when cooks had to either work somewhere to get cool techniques, or it was, cooking in the early 2000s was still very much reminiscent of the chef with his little black box of cue cards with the recipes that he stole from his sous chef back in London or France, locked away in his cubby so that he couldn't get them, and you were only handed those recipes when you needed to make them on the section when the menu changed. The industry was just full of pirates. Like, we relished in that. It was like, we joked that it's like, okay, yeah, this is our pirate ship. It was full of sexism and just like locker room talk all day. But this was my home as an industry for like well over a decade. It has evolved so much. I believe in the time that I've been cooking, as someone who's mid-30s now, cooking since he was a teenager, the industry has become many times more self-aware than it ever was back in those early days. It is painfully aware of its problems, and it's painfully aware of how marginalized it is as an industry compared to others. The restaurant industry, the food service industry. Back in my day, like, working at a fancy hotel was seen as selling out because you got paid $22 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And you weren't pushing. You weren't, going for
comfortable.
Yeah, you were comfortable. It's like when you couldn't hack it in one of the city's best restaurants anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that was New York or Vancouver or Montreal, you'd go and work for the hotel and get a cushy job. And when you're a 25-year-old kid and you're just going for it and partying and drinking, and your entremetier is like doing coke in the bathroom or whatever, yeah, the world's your oyster and you think you're indestructible, but you don't realize that there's a reason why you don't see 40-year-old line cooks working in restaurants like that, because they just can't do it anymore. And I've suffered that as well. I had to get back surgery last year. I don't really talk about that much, but I had scoliosis my whole life, and just working in restaurants for 15 years just absolutely ruined me. So now I have a titanium spine. But
my mom told me when I was 16, no, you can't be a chef because I also have scoliosis, and you can't be a chef because your back is too bad. So I was already put down at the very beginning of that career.
Yeah, but it's true, because every time I would go to the doctor with like debilitating pain, they'd be like, you should get a different job because what you do is not good for you.
And just in the preparation of this interview, I was talking to a head chef in Berlin, and I was like, so like, how do we make the food system, like how do we make the restaurant industry so like how do you call this, like non-self-destructive, that people are staying longer? And he's like, but it's impossible. It's like a job where you have to work with your body, so it has like a clock that is ticking.
Yes, this is true to some degree.
To some, exactly.
But maybe that's the point. And what, to your original question, is like, what are the biggest issues facing the food industry now today compared to when I started cooking? I mean, today in a mid-pandemic world. We're not post-COVID. We're in the middle of it.
Yeah.
I think it's about the survival of the restaurant industry. But I think that also kind of skews some of the real problems. I think one of the main focuses that the restaurant industry today should be dealing with is like a reevaluation of the restaurant industry. And if that chef's answer to how do we make cooking food for, let's just like, for me, whenever I was working on a problem in the lab, whatever it is, anywhere in my life, I like to zoom out and then like look at the blocks of things that you take as your axioms, as your ground floor assumptions about what that thing is. And if you say to yourself, okay, well, yeah, working in a restaurant is self-destructive. That's just the way it is. That isn't tackling the problem properly. You have to say, okay, well, what is working in a restaurant? It's cooking for food. It's the transformation of food and serving that to guests. That can look all sorts of ways. And it doesn't have to look the ways that it does today, where restaurants are pushed into the margins because customers only want to pay so much for so much, like they want to pay as little as possible for as much as possible. And everyone knows that the margins in restaurants are so incredibly razor thin that oftentimes the books don't add up. And so your cooks are paid shit and servers work on tips. And there's all the sorts of disequity within the restaurant economic system that leads to, in a period of crisis, just mass closures because the numbers don't work and they never could have.
So do we have to rethink the way that restaurants, which is basically a space where we cook food for people, right? We have to rethink the way a restaurant actually looks like? Because I think why it's so, or as I understood from you, is your opinion on why it's so hard also to bring forward changes, because we try to like put a little band-aid on like a system that is already just maybe not greatly designed for a change. So what do we have to redesign in that space, in your opinion?
I think that like the proliferation of fine dining establishments over the last 20, 30 years has just been like mind-boggling. The quality of food, if you assume that a plated multi-course menu is somehow hierarchically better than a platter of shared communal offerings for whatever reason, if you believe that, if you believe that the French style of service is somehow the pinnacle or the paragon of what a dining experience could be, which has been reinforced by things like the Michelin Guide or things by like the 50 Best Guide, it is a very specific style of service that excludes other types of restoration. Then you're going to be led down this path of just like, okay, I've been a sous chef for one of my city's top chefs for 5 years. I've put in my time. Now it's time for me to branch out and, spread my gospel and take my, spin on things to the public. And the industry becomes ever and ever more saturated, fighting over smaller and smaller pieces of the pie. I mean, there's been articles in Eater written about, the cook crisis or like, the wage gap in restaurants compared to other fields for their levels of experience. And yeah, we can say that, we're talking about putting band-aids on these problems or trying to find ways like, okay, no tipping, no this, no that, to fix some of these problems. But these problems won't, it's like a self-creating problem because everyone's just been taking assumptions that this is how food should be. And there's so many ways food can be. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. You can criticize fast food for making convenient food only one way. But why can't fast food restaurants be more the community-style delis that used to be on every neighborhood street corner in the United States in like the 1960s or things like that, with prepared foods, with sandwiches, with...
Well, honestly, because I think what fine dining has become is gone away from this community style and sharing, because that was also how it was cooked, right? It was cooked in a community style with a lot of people, and fine dining has become a lot of one person being the creative head and then putting his or her, mostly his, creativity on a plate and having to, and like getting awards for that or getting like attention for that. And it had to be one person because it was very rewarding for one person then. So maybe that is one of the reasons why it became this like, this menu and set menu design, and very competitive in a way. Do you think that, because we believe that actually this whole collaborating, sharing recipes, what you said at the beginning, that people like kept their recipes, sharing recipes, sharing resources, sharing farmers, sharing knowledge on how to cook. Do you think that is a good tool to change something, or is that also a romantic idea?
I think it's a necessary tool. I think with the amount of people that are going to be forced into unemployment because of this pandemic, who have worked in food and only worked in food in one capacity, in restaurants, in cities, there will be this need to put these people to work, put their skills to use. These are some of the most, from like a standpoint of looking at an economy from a bird's eye level view, productive people who are able-bodied, who are there to work, who can work a lot. They're young, they have lots of work hours ahead of them. They either don't have children or many people to support their families. So you can't exclude this potent portion of the population and not give them an outlet. And that the restaurants aren't going to come back like that. Like the world economy is not going to be able to support all these people doing exactly what they were doing at that razor thin margin before this all happened. When we have an economic contraction, it's just not going to add up. But people still need to eat. There are still problems to be addressed in the food system.
So what are the skills that young people have that are in the industry right now that you think are valuable, and that they can use in the food industry? Because I think there is, especially in our generation, there is like such a need to have a meaningful job and like see the outcomes that you have, right? So what is the way for young chefs to go to there, and what are the skills that they already have and that they can apply to maybe other disciplines?
There are so many. Working in restaurants for like 16 years, all I've seen are some of the hardest working, most professional, dedicated, passionate people in most any industry. I'm always shocked when I go to adjacent industries, or like if I go and like hang out at a university, it's like, cool, okay, yeah, it's like 11:30, lunch break, see you, whatever, we're in the middle of. Like, cooks don't think that way. Cooks are so incredibly tenacious, and they have a mentality that just gets shit done. So that alone is worth its weight in gold in any workforce. But all the translational skills that you gain when you've worked in restaurants for even 5 years, the organizational skills, a tacit understanding of flavors, of seasonality, of how to handle vegetables, of safety protocols, management protocols, logistics, like on the fly problem solving, creativity. And you have to like take something that's about to be thrown out and transform it into something that's about to go on sale and be amazing. There are so many skills that other industries would look at for whatever problems they had to solve and say, okay, well, you're an amazing hire. Please come work for me. Even the amount of times I've seen cooks like either fix things like plumbing in a restaurant or grab a wrench and like fix a fryer or a grill. There's so many other industries where like people are like, I'm hands off, please, I defer, and things just move so slowly because of that. Food is the target. Like I said, like cooking multi-course dinners in restaurants for rich clientele with disposable incomes is not the only way people eat food. There are so many places within the food system where you take a cook with 6-7 years experience, plug them in and say, where can I interface with all these people who are already here? okay, are you a logistics manager for like a local grocery store chain that has surplus produce that you need to do something with instead of throwing it out? So that just from a business standpoint, you can make more money. Allow me to build a program. Give me a minimal amount of resources and let me turn a loss into a profit for you, or at least mitigate it. You know, you can go and work for flavor houses, for people who want to understand how to use, you know, new and upcoming foods to their benefit. There are so many companies that saw the pandemic happen, saw that the world is changing, saw that things can't keep happening the same way, and are searching to whoever's got an alternative answer just to try things out.
I agree. The only thing that I see as a hurdle is that I think a lot of the jobs within the food industry are still seen as like they're not they don't get the validation that they deserve. Like in the German language, if you call someone a farmer, it's an insult. Chefs are also like all these like craft jobs are not seen as highly. So I think the idea for us to go into other industries, and I think you just have to be a very self-confident person in order to do that. And I think that is going to be, in general, I think something for the industry to really push this validation and getting more worth for what you're doing, and really saying like, this is a craft, this is a skill that I have.
Validation's evaporated regardless. You know what I mean? In 2020, there's no chef that's like winning awards because, you know, even looking at David Kinch turning down his James Beard Award because he's like, what does this mean right now? You know, like the industry is in no place to accept awards for trying to survive or for things that we did last year under completely different circumstances. So for any chef,
but there's also validation within the society. I mean,
yes, and cooks used to be undervalued. Cooks used to be like, oh, you're just a cook. Oh, you work as like a short order cook. Like, not too good for you. And somehow, yes, this rise of the egotistical chef, this, you know, the commander in chief, the bad boy, the rock star, has changed people's perceptions and raised the role of the chef to a point of celebrity, perhaps to the detriment of restaurants everywhere. It's tough to say, but I think people just have to suck it up, because if that validation that came from the outside, that came from bloggers, that came from restaurant critics, that came from, you know, the gatekeepers of awards and stamps and, you know, little glass trophies, that doesn't mean anything today. So we might as well just take we just might as well take a clue, like take a hint from that and say, okay, well, if the validation is dried up out there, like maybe let's just reconsider what actually matters. And it is hard to make that shift. It is hard to accept that you're going to go have to work at a depot or like commute, not to the hottest corner of, you know, your downtown central business district, but, you know, 45 minutes outside of a city where the rent is cheap, where they can build warehouses and then tackle a problem there. But it's no less rewarding when you realize what's actually being done. There is so much shit food being served ready to eat in grocery stores, being sold by huge corporations who have the means to make it taste better, but maybe lack the understanding of how that actually works. We don't need more people on who have like university degrees on sensory analysis panels to tell people what tastes good. We need people who actually make food taste good for hundreds, if not thousands of people every month, understanding how to make food in the food system taste good, and who have an implicit understanding of seasonality, of responsible sourcing, of a connection to farmers, instead of just looking at products on a spreadsheet and say, oh no, we should probably think about making this product this way. It could be for like here in Copenhagen, not that they do a bad job, but there's this small restaurant chain called Kofoko that makes pretty good ready-to-eat meals that are sold in every 7-Eleven, whether it's a little pesto salad or a tuna wrap or whatever. And it's probably a lot better than a lot of the things that you find elsewhere in Europe or, you know, in Australia or Canada or the States. And that's exactly the sort of mentality I think people need to have, to realize that, like, if you can improve the lives of 5,000 people who are just getting a piece of takeout food from a 7-Eleven, that's way better than just getting, you know, one good Yelp review from some traveling blogger for your service.
My point with also this validation, and I maybe meant more appreciation as a word, but it's like that I wish that this pandemic and this like rethinking the system does not mean for chefs to spread out to completely different disciplines, but maybe rather, and I think that has a lot to do with appreciation, but rather think that it's actually a cool and worthy job to go and become a farmer or become a butcher or become someone else in the supply chain that probably has a bigger impact than if you work in a fine dining restaurant. But that is still something that you would like to follow for as a career path for your life. And I think we're not at that point yet. Because also you get more appreciation as a chef in a fine dining restaurant than you being a farmer or a butcher. But I would hope for that in the future, that these job opportunities or these jobs become something that is that young people go into because they get something out of it, or they feel that they can foster change within the system in these different jobs.
Then that's exactly what we have to work on. I think my old boss, Dan Giusti, is doing a great job of that in institutional food in the States. I mean, he started, 4 years ago, trying to change school food, trying to hire chefs from traditional fields, from traditionally great restaurants to work with him, who led Noma when Noma was like at the top of the charts, to cook simple food properly, deliciously, responsibly, to affect the lives of the most important generation, which is like the youngsters that we have today. And it is an uphill battle for him.
Yeah.
But he's doing it. And it's going to take more people do it until we hit a critical mass of amazing chefs who've changed gears, who've shown people that there is so much more to address in food than what new technique is going to become the paradigm that serves the top 5% of the richest people on earth going forward.
But how do you create that equitable validation for all players in the food system? What is the way to get there?
Dive in. It's going to take.
Yeah, it honestly is, because I'm just thinking about Dan Giusti, and he's just like doing it. Like, I have no idea what made him so motivated to go into that. But like, he is just doing it, and he's constantly, and So I think I think we just have to do it.
And it's going to take pathfinders. It's going to take trailblazers to show people that this is the way forward. Like, Dan Giusti will not be out of the job. Brigade will not shut down because schools still need to stay open. Children still need education. When they're at school, they still need to be fed. And if he can do it better than the competition for the same price or cheaper and produce a better product that's feeding children more delicious food, or cooking things from scratch and showing them how these things matter, then hopefully that will still be in a meritocracy and gain traction and grow. This will not be the first crisis, the first existential crisis that the restaurant industry will face in the next 25 to 30 years. Like, there are many more to come. Whether it's droughts that are chewing up the supplies of niche farms, whether it becomes exorbitantly expensive for a restaurant like Masa in New York to fly in fish from Tokyo every day. There are so many questions about things that we have taken for granted in the restaurant world that are going to keep popping up and keep forcing the restaurant industry to grapple with its structural underpinnings. Meanwhile, you'll look across to other fields, and the people who can't afford to eat in those restaurants still need to eat something. That's where a large portion of their paychecks and their income still needs to go, so that they can stay alive, so they can still be contributing members of society. And if you're in food today, you'll realize, maybe, hopefully not painfully, sometime in the future, that is a place for you to be. That is no less than the pained artistry that we've come to accept from chefs for the past 15 to 25 years. I'm not denigrating the work and the amazing art that has produced some of the world's best restaurants in recent memory, but the industry has kind of spilled out so much so that that new developments aren't so much about pushing the field forward in a direction that we can understand as progress, but it's just kind of, like a puddle of paint on a floor, just spilling out in all directions. It's becoming more complex. People try to differentiate so they can carve out a little piece of that industry for themselves, so they can stamp out space. Meanwhile, the vast majority of the way people eat, no one's really focusing on that in any way that is helping to affect really positive things coming into focus. And now is as good a time as any to realize that.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's actually a very nice point to start in opening up our virtual room to everyone else. And start the Q&A. Yeah, guys, I would love to encourage you to ask direct questions to David. Please use, again, as I said, if you go and open the participant tab on your right-hand side, you can raise your hand and give me or Carla the sign that you want to ask a question. And if you want to turn on your video, that's always nice, so we know that you're not a robot, but you're an actual person sitting with us. So please feel free to ask questions and raise your hand, or just start your camera and we know that you want to ask a question. Let's go. There is actually one question by Ilva. Ilva, do you want to ask that directly? Where is she? Ilva? She says, I would love to, but I'm eating. Okay, I'm going to ask her a question. Sure. Hello, everyone. Great conversation. Excellent questions. I have a question for David about the role of restaurants and chefs in building a more sustainable food future. Clearly, Noma is an inspiration for many, but what are the key things normal restaurants should look to implement, in his opinion? Should restaurants engage with global frameworks such as the SDGs, or is it the only role of governments and big corporations? Big question.
Yeah, the sustainable development goals are an ambitious set of targets that I think if a small restaurant tried to adopt all of them wholesale, they would probably collapse. They wouldn't be able to operate as a restaurant, which makes it feel like an insurmountable problem when you try to be like, okay, let's eliminate poverty, let's clean up the oceans. Like, you can't do it all, no matter your size. Like it's not a set of goals that scale to every person everywhere. The guy running a little corner store that sells, like off-the-shelf meals or whatever, only has so much wiggle room to affect the sustainable development goals. What can a normal restaurant do to affect change going forward if it's still operating? I think, honestly, like rethinking how that restaurant operates in a way. There's always, when I was a sous chef at my last restaurant and you had to do the ordering, and it was always this gamble of, okay, well, how much tuna, how much black cod do we order for the week? Like, what happens if the fresh fish that we're using for the sashimi doesn't sell out? Like, are we gonna eat it on this one? I think that like the standard framework of rigid menus for the sake of consistency that is normally only judged by critics. So when they have repeat visits, whether it's the Michelin Guide or local critics, I think throw that out the window. I think maybe going forward, find some sort of hybrid solution that is kind of the takeout that we're seeing more and more restaurants do today. But like full time in addition to seated service. I think there's a lot of ways that we can evaluate how restaurants operate, how those income streams come into existence that can help mediate some of the pains that they've traditionally had. And again, it's not going to be easy. I mean, change is always painful, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't address these questions.
We were talking a little bit about the award system, and there's some new awards that are like green awards and like the green leaf thingy. Do you think that will give an incentive to restaurants to change something from within, or is that just difficult?
There's been a lot of pushback against Michelin Guide for their green clover, calling it greenwashing. Christian Puglisi had a really great, he received one of these green clovers for his work at Relay, which is sadly closing at the end of this year. And he's like, no one ever checked up, like no one can't, they just assumed that we're a green restaurant. No, there was no inspector asking us about our sources. There was no groundwork done. And he's right. It is a very surface level thing. And I think that the way award systems have operated awards restaurants for it, award systems push restaurants to be a certain way that goes against the sustainability and longevity of the industry. It forces them to become extreme versions of themselves that are constantly trying to one-up each other and constantly trying to grapple for the top pole position at the expense of trying to, from the ground up, in a very honest way, forego the kind of chase, forego the circus of it all, to be like, okay, if we are a restaurant who wants to be forward thinking, how do we look to the landscape? How do we look to our farmers? How do we look to the supply chain? How do we look to the waste bin and completely reinvent what we serve or how we serve it? To be honest, if you were to ask me what the world's most sustainable restaurant is, I would say it's a cafeteria. It's a cafeteria where you're making large batch food for as many people as possible. You're cooking with whatever ingredients you have that day. You're making a delicious meal, and you're making sure that nothing goes to waste. Feeding the most amount of people possible at an equitable price point, a delicious meal that doesn't have to go to waste, that doesn't have to get criticized, that doesn't have to be, and of course it should be delicious, and you can't feed people bad food and expect them to come back for more, but it doesn't have to be marked with 3 stars or 2 stars or meet all these impossible criteria. Because if you just like extrapolate our present course 25 years even into the future, how much sense will it have? How much sense will it make to have a Michelin inspector come in and risk your influx of clients for the next year because your linen isn't folded, or because there was a little brown scrap on, or brown edge on a leaf that uses as a garnish? Like, it's so arcane in its vaulting of these esoteric and unattainable ideals onto our industry that are responsible for a huge carbon footprint that we really have to like reevaluate from the ground up, starting from literally the soil, where our food is coming from, what we choose to put on our menu, how we connect farmers to suppliers, how we ask for things, how rigid we are in what we choose to put on our menu, what we choose to cook with, how we look at our recipes, and say, like, look for the most easily tackled problems and focus on them in a way that has or does the least harm.
Ilva had a little follow-up question on her question. I'm going to unmute her. Are you there?
Yes.
Perfect. Can you say real quick, can you introduce yourself really quickly and then ask your follow-up question, please?
Well done, everyone, and well done for asking so many exciting questions. I think this is such an important topic right now. And as David has said as well, like it's such a tough restaurant industry. So really,
Ilva, can you, sorry, you're pretty hard to understand. Can you speak up a little bit?
Yes, of
I
course.
can hear.
Maybe my...
Oh, yeah.
I'll speak into this a little bit. Anyway, I'll stop with thank yous and say, so yeah, so my background is in nutrition and food policy, and I also used to work in restaurants for about 10 years. I'm Swedish, but I spent about 20 years in London, recently moved to Amsterdam. So very sort of multicultural food and restaurant experience. And I spent the last 5+ years working for the Sustainable Restaurant Association, which also has a sort of certification assessments where they ask about 3 across 10 key areas about what restaurants do, including social aspects, food sourcing, environmental aspects. And I recently set up as an independent consultant, and I find sort of the aspect of looking at the food system as a whole really, really interesting and really necessary. I find working with so many different types of restaurants, it's really easy to pick and choose of the best in food, for instance, but that might mean that as a restaurant you then are not paying your staff properly, or you are using lots of plastics, for instance, or you know, like this like holistic, really complex integrated food system that we are all part of. And I think it can be really difficult for a small restaurant to know what to focus on. So I think it's just really helpful if there is some sort of guidance, and I'm definitely not suggesting that these small business owners should go and read the SDG framework or the planetary boundaries, but somewhere, you know, together we all have a responsibility to make. I think restaurants and chefs are in a really, really good place to make decisions if they are allowed to do so. So I think governments obviously have a responsibility to perhaps redirect for like better produce, for instance, and things like that. Yes, if you go, I think, for example, there's really clear, like reduce food waste by half, for instance, that could be measured, and restaurants could really feel part of something bigger. There's also things like equal rights, like we know that often the pay in the hospitality industry, like it was the international, I think, pay gap day or whatever it's called a few days back, and I think there's still a massive pay gap in the hospitality industry in terms of equal pay for equal jobs. But I think there's definitely things restaurants could do, and I think experience having done a lot of training and workshop, I think chefs really like knowing these things, and they like knowing that they are part of a bigger picture, and perhaps also knowing that what they know is really important. You know, I think a lot of cooks and chefs go into the restaurant industry because they might not be academic, they might not have a science background. That's not to say that they don't understand these things, they want to know these things, you know. So I think it's such a great tool to have all this like creativity for people. And I'll stop there. But yeah, so super interesting. So thank you both, Frida and David, for the amazing conversation.
Thank you, Ivla. That's like, yeah, there's some really good points there. I mean, it is sometimes hard for to know where their impact actually has impact. And I think some sort of broader framework or like citywide restaurant association that had the capacity to make every little piece that a restaurant plugs into in a local economy more transparent would be a great thing. I mean, Federico, we talked about like the role of networkers connecting farmers to food producers to understand what things they needed to be growing to help heal the soil from a macro level. If there was like a study done on, local soil health within a region or a province or a country, that then could allow chefs to voluntarily choose to put different things on their menu that weren't imported, that would actually have a local effect. Not just, planning a menu blindly and then saying, okay, where do we get this from? I don't care where it's from. If it's coming from Peru, so be it, because I want my menu to look a certain way. And it is difficult for people who operate small businesses to have like the time and resources to facilitate that information, to plug into it and have it be like easily digestible. But that's another great place where a lot of clever and bright-minded chefs or people working within food have the capacity to do real good, is get into the middle. So maybe the creation of better or more effectual restaurant associations is part of that solution. But there's a lot of ways to tackle this.
My last follow-up question before we go into the rooms where we can discuss a bit further is, what do young people, because we were talking and you were saying, like I realized later what my materials, what kind of skills they gave me, and you were just saying now that there is not a good access for people already in the industry like chefs to get this, to get general information on what is good agriculture, for example. And what do young people need? Like what is missing in the food industry that we know which way to go? Like, because what is missing in our educational system maybe for young people?
I think that when I think of my own culinary education, like there was only talk of French technique. There was nothing beyond that. There was nothing broader than that. You didn't go visit a farm. You didn't do anything like that. And I mean, Frida, you're a student. You're an alumnus of
UNISG,
which is an amazing university, which isn't a cooking school. And it's funny because I taught a master's class there earlier this year, actually. And there is almost like a push in the faculty, because UNSIG shouldn't be seen as a cooking school because it's a university.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe there needs to be something between those two that teaches a more holistic, is the only word you could use to describe it, view of the food system to the people that are going to make food, not just the basics, not just the bare minimum 1-year certificate that puts you into a restaurant and says, have at it, learn the rest from all those who came before you. But so that there's an actual emphasis, or at least, if not that, then a continuing education. Imagine if there was, I mean, that's exactly what Renee's trying to do with the MAD school, is provide this sort of high-level, holistic view of a continued education for people at the highest level. But it's really small potatoes now, and it needs to happen all over the place. Like this one tiny school in Copenhagen isn't going to be the sole solution. It has to happen, from the ground up all over the world. So that pressure should come from as much inside the industry as without. Like, we can't look to other people to solve these problems for us when we're probably, whether that's chefs or food producers, institutional or private, the people who are best equipped to understand our own shortcomings, and then knock on the doors of policymakers. But that takes some sort of level of organization amongst ourselves. So I don't think that the word should be as focused on competition among, who's doing what, who's the fanciest, who's getting all of the attention in the media or the papers or opinionated about dining, but like that we actually form coalitions and of mutual support to affect real change and deal with these problems.
Sure. Kim has another question. Kim, I will unmute you if you want to ask the question directly. Hello.
Hello. Hi, sorry. I was trying to figure all this out. I'm going to leave my camera off though. Not sure if I can sum up the question again, or let me find it. But basically, I just wanted to say that with the topic of validation and appreciation being discussed a little bit, that so I'm a similar perception. Example for a farmer, and that connection to something. I think some question really needs to be done for people to understand that, and also for young people going into, maybe wanting to go into these fields, to actually think that there are careers worth pursuing, because these jobs aren't only, like, as you said, people need to be fed, but these jobs are not only nourishing on like a mental and physical and personal level, but they're also like key to keeping heritage and culture and tradition alive. So actually, in my opinion, they're essential, and it's necessary for the young generation to realize. Yeah. Not sure if the question came out.
How do you think we can convince people that those jobs are careers worth pursuing?
Yeah, exactly. Also for the people who are going into jobs, to understand that they're actually valuable jobs and careers.
Yeah.
Yeah. How does any job be seen as valuable? I mean, it takes a fever pitch. It takes it's tough because it's not, governments can push so much. Governments can form initiatives or subsidize programs that either advertise a need to work on these problems, to help subsidize education or what have you. But I think the problem with the human predicament in the 21st century going forward from here on out, where 2 degrees of temperature increase across the world and all of the ramifications that come with that, increased population load, increased wealth inequality, all of the things that are going to have real big effects for the future generation. It's not a wartime effort. It's not an immediate problem with an immediate and urgent need, but it's going to take the same level of response as, everyone in World War II on any side of that issue had to grapple with for their own countries, whether it was, wartime bonds or women working in factories or whatever all of those extreme measures were. It's going to take that same amount of work to get ourselves through to the 22nd century with any semblance of a world worth living in that's not overwrought with problems every single day or disaster. And when we're looking at it from the view of this slow moving thing where things change, but like not really, and you're faced with this like looming crisis that never really materializes in an urgent way. It's really hard to pin that down, but all I can say is that it's going to take brave people doing it and proving that it's worth doing for more people to want to keep doing it. It's like jumping into cold water. I say like the hardest things in life are like jumping. It's like looking at a frozen lake and saying, okay, I'm going to jump in there. At some point, I'm going to be falling through the cold air and I'm going to hit something that's going to shock and it's going to suck and it's going to be hard. But at some point, I'll acclimatize and at some point, I'll climb out and wrap myself in a towel and sit in a sauna and I will feel better and I will move past that. But it's frightening as hell when you're staring at that frozen lake. And that's what these jobs are. To young people who would rather work as app developers or whatever, they're like, why would I want to do that? Like, that's weird. That's not the life I want to live. But they won't have a life worth living if more people don't get into these fields and try to solve these solutions firsthand. And it's going to take people who already know how to work with food today, who are my age, who are older than me, or just a bit younger, to make that conscious leap because they're prepared to, because maybe they have enough savings in the bank to be able to, whatever it is. It's going to take more people doing that for more people to want to. It's a mass effect. If you see 5 people doing it, it's so much less scarier for the 6 to jump into. If you see 500 people doing it, it's so much less scarier for the 600 to do it too. so on and so forth ad infinitum. And I really think that the pandemic is a wake-up call, because the contraction of the restaurant industry is that push. It pushes people off the ledge into that cold water for them. They didn't take the jump, but they're falling nonetheless. And how you react to actually hitting that makes all the difference. Dan just did it. I'm doing it now. I'll talk more about that when I'm allowed to. But there's a whole world out there beyond restaurants that needs to be proven, needs to be demonstrated by brave and audacious people that, these are things worth fighting for. And
yeah, and I think there's definitely needs to be people like you and Dan who just show that it's possible, and who already have an audience, and already have an audience of a lot of young people that maybe are now clueless of where to go, and maybe are a little bit swimming in that situation. Deepak Kumar has another follow-up question on the educational system. I'm also going to unmute you now. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you ask your question and say real quick who you are?
Definitely. Great session, firstly, David and Frida. My name is Deepak, and I'm from India. So I graduated from UNISC in Polenzo last year. So, because of pandemic, I've been in India, and I started a home bakery. So, I'm just, getting stuff done and learning a lot of new stuff. So moving to the question, David. Over the last hour, you all spoke about the concept of sustainable restaurants, or like sustainability as such in the hospitality industry, or even on a global scale for that matter. But even though the restaurants have been there for quite a while, and it has been making a great impact in educating the customers and preserving the ecosystem, the word has been, the word is being thrown around a lot. The idea of sustainability, to a point where it is losing its meaning. And so, what are your thoughts on it in terms of what sustainable is? Because even wrote a cover letter of sort, I think a month ago, where you also spoke over the same thing. Just wanted your thoughts on it.
Yeah. I think the word has been washed out, played out to the point of almost meaninglessness. Where if you have an extremely complicated product that requires, 7 different systems of supply chains that reach into rare earth metals in Eastern China, to, plant extracts that are farmed from the rainforests of Brazil to produce, but somehow you package it in a recycled box that you bought from South Korea that was shipped halfway around the world, you still get to stamp oh, we're a sustainable company. Look at our recycled box. It doesn't mean anything. I think there needs to be a different metric of understanding what the actual problem is. The problem isn't using one thing that's less bad. It's about understanding the totality, like a true cost accounting of what it takes to do whatever it is you're doing, and saying, okay, this is how much harm we cause. Let's try and reduce that as much as possible while still doing the same thing. It's like the same thing of okay, well, if talking about that sous chef is if working in restaurants is backbreaking work, oh, it's always going to be backbreaking work, because no, but then what does it mean to work in a restaurant? What does it mean to do that? What does it mean to serve food? Change that definition and you'll find a lot of room to make gains. And I think that the concept, and this is what I've just started calling it myself, of harm reduction. Just assume that no matter what you do as a human on Earth, you're going to cause harm to someone else, somewhere else, or some ecosystem outside of your own, or within your own for that matter. There are always externalities. This is like a fundamental law of the universe. You cannot have something without fucking something else up somewhere else. And if everyone was just aware of that, and then said, okay, let's work on fucking that other stuff up just a little bit less. And let's prove it. Let's show where we were and where we are today, and say okay, this is the harm reduction, and make that, instead of your quarterly growth earnings, like your key performance indicator. Like how if we were still to sell the same amounts of product, but reduce our harm, internalize those costs, and bring them down, draw them down, whether that's a carbon emission, whether that's sewage overflow, whatever, then I think people would have a more honest view of the problem at stake. I think true cost accounting in the world of food is a vitally important tool to let people understand the problems of sustainability. where you take into account everything that is subsidized, the carbon emissions, how far something's traveled, and then work that factor into the cost of the product. And at least no one's going to pay $25 for 500 grams of ground beef. But if they see that that's what it would cost to plant all the trees that would offset the forest that had to be cleared to grow the soybeans that then had to be shipped across the Atlantic to feed that cow somewhere in, Eastern Europe or Germany or the middle of Spain, then people would have a better understanding and say, okay, well, that's a lot of money. Why does it cost so much? And then you let people eke it out in an economy of that lowest actual true external, but now internalized cost. And that becomes the new marketplace. And you let capitalism run from there. But it takes an actual accounting of all the harm done to the entirety of the system to actually get a pure view. Because right now it's just a stamp. Right now, sustainability is any minor action, the least action for that matter, that a company could do to prove that they're somehow better than the other guy. And then they say, well, we're sustainable. But how sustainable are you? Is it used, it has there are no gradations within it. There's no levels. It should be something that is quantized and calculated as such, but it becomes a binary. It's like you either are a mum about it and you're unsustainable, but it's not like you're going to advertise that, so you just try and go by and hope no one notices, or you like and trumpet that you've done one little thing that doesn't give an actual representation of just how bad it is that you do anything at all, or what actions you've taken to reduce that to the minimum it could possibly be going forward.
Yeah, and also where are you sustainable, right? Like you can do all the good things in like the ecological, like you can source the best ingredients and still pay your employees like super badly. So is that sustainable then? I mean, questionable. Hey, having our dinner also in mind, I think we should go into our smaller rooms for 10 minutes now and then and get to know each other and discuss this further there. So you guys will be automatically put into your smaller rooms. And it would be nice if you would turn on your cameras and just get to know each other for 10 minutes and discuss further with David and us the topic. So I see you back in 10 minutes. Carla, you do it. We're done for tonight. Thank you all so much for joining. Especially the last 10 minutes were very fruitful, at least for me. Thank you, David, so much for joining and taking so much time. It was really, interesting and inspiring, and we're very excited to hear and see what the future for you brings. So maybe we talk about that soon again. The next two sessions will be on the 28th with Daniel Kofal and Dominic Flammer, who will talk a lot about heritage, traditions, food culture. So that's going to be really interesting. And on the 29th, we're talking actually about public canteens and public kitchens with Speiseräume and Kantine Zukunft, the project here in Berlin, about actually the validation for chefs who are working in exactly these bigger kitchens. So that's going to be also really interesting, and I hope you guys are joining. If you want to continue the conversation further, we have our Stammtisch, which is our digital Slack channel, basically, so an exchange platform where you can meet again and talk. Or I hope to see you all next year in person, and by that time, I hope we will be drunk together. So looking forward to that, and I wish you a nice evening all. Thank you, David, again, and I see you on the 28th, everyone. Bye.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
Bye, guys.